podium. Dr. Ruiz.
Thank you. Bolstering international biosafety is at the heart of our efforts to prevent future pandemics. And currently, the existing framework for ensuring that research across the globe occurs safely relies on a patchwork of non-enforceable standards and guidance, including the World Health Organization's Laboratory Biosafety Manual. Beyond these international guidance documents, it is incumbent upon each nation to enact its own policies and standards to promote biosafety. Dr. Yosef, what shortcomings exist within this current international biosafety framework?
Thank you. Yes, the International Biosafety Framework is primarily, as you've noted, in the form of guidelines and not regulations, and so it is not enforceable. Another challenge is that it's very high level and not necessarily as specific as some of the US biosafety guidelines in particular. I think that there is more work that could be done both in the United States to improve our own biosafety guidelines as well as to improve biosafety guidelines and practices and regulations internationally so that we can really more effectively safeguard this research.
Okay. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, renewed attention has been paid to ensuring that research to advance our understanding of dangerous pathogens is done safely across the globe, including by tightening standards for lab operations. Dr. Yosef, what measures have the United States and other nations taken to bolster lab safety standards? And how can these policies serve as a blueprint for the types of biosafety reforms we'd like to see implemented at the international level?
Sure. So we do have a patchwork of biosafety guidelines and regulations here in the United States. It includes the recombinant DNA guidelines for recombinant molecular genetics work in labs that work with NIH funding. We've got the Federal Select Agent Program, and those are both in the, and then we've got the Biosafety and Microbiological Biomedical Laboratories guidelines. And so this is a patchwork. It's not comprehensive, but it's a lot better than some of the other systems that we see overseas that are considerably weaker. There are some of these features are not perfect, but they could be emulated internationally. So for example, our system here in the United States of international biosafety, Biosafety Oversight Committee review within universities is a really valuable tool that we could replicate overseas. Some of the regulations we have in the United States, like the Federal Select Agent Program, are not perfect and could be made more comprehensive, but it could be the beginning of a blueprint for efforts overseas. I think one of the challenges, though, is that the sort of personnel training and the resources and the lab infrastructure internationally is not necessarily to the same standard that we have in the US. So we would have to make an investment in terms of capacity building and partnership to really help raise the bar internationally to the level we'd like to see. And so we really need to put our money where our mouth is if we really want to drive progress there. And I think we're also hoping that IBIS can help with some of this work.
Okay. And so what precautions can be taken to ensure that bolstering lab safety is appropriately balanced with continued scientific advancement, including in the realm of pandemic preparedness? And I'll ask you that question too, Dr. Parker. Dr. Yosef?
Sure. I think we can certainly continue with our work domestically and internationally to invest in biosafety and to invest in pandemic preparedness, research and development. That's critical. But as we see the global spread of research into these areas and the global spread of high containment labs, we have to ensure that it's done in a safe and secure environment. We have to make investments to make sure that the labs, the high containment labs where this work is being conducted, have appropriate biosafety provisions in place and biosecurity provisions in place. As I've noted in my written and oral testimony, biosafety and biosecurity are very weak globally, so we have a lot of work to do if we're really going to safeguard this work and make sure it's done safely and responsibly.
Yeah. Dr. Parker?
Sure. I think the most important thing to do, internationally, is how do we make sure and support international institutional norms. Even a broader institution, they may host a high containment lab within their university. It's the institutional norms. I think the guidances and regulations will come. We got to do that. But if we don't have strong institutional norms that understand the need for skilled workforce, they need the funding and resources for operations and maintenance, sustaining these laboratories extremely complex. I'm a former commander of a high containment lab, and I know how complex they are and the detailed attention that you have to do there. And so, not all countries, share, our view of, what that means to have strong institutional norms ethics and the resources needed.
Would a international school of lab safety and biosecurity practices in the United States help with that?
Say that, I'm sorry, I didn't.
An international school of biosafety in the U.S. with a certain institution that brings in personnel from other labs to come and get trained here on biosafety, would that be helpful?
That would be helpful, but I also think about it as, training is necessary but not sufficient. So educational is important too, and it's like ongoing.
You also need the equipment.
It's really, there's an organization called ABSA International that is the professional society for biosafety scientists and professionals. And ABSA actually had a great idea several years ago, third-party accreditation for high-containment labs. And that's be analogous.
What role does gain-of-function research play in pandemic preparedness research?
Well, I think,
if anything.
yeah. First, let's make sure that we're using the right terminology.
Okay.
Because gain of function is a very, very confusing term.
Yes, let's clarify it.
And well, it's not codified.
I said let's clarify it.
Oh, clarify it. Okay, clarify it. Okay, so gain of function is a common experimental procedure used in biomedical research and biotechnology. So it's fairly common, but there are guidelines. The NIH guidelines are appropriate, but there's then, and the vast majority of it, as long as it's done under the appropriate guidelines, can be done safely with appropriate institutional oversight too at the laboratory level. But there's this exceedingly small, I think it is exceedingly small area of gain of function research of concern. I actually call it especially dangerous enhanced pathogen research that we have to have more oversight of. But I would say the normal research procedures using the relatively safe gain of function, that's just part of our biomedical research enterprise, and it's been important for our biodefense and pandemic preparedness. I don't believe, my opinion, that the especially dangerous enhanced pathogen research has contributed significantly to pandemic preparedness. And remember, I was a previous executive leader at ASPR, and some of those studies came out, did not affect any of our vaccine development decisions.
Got it. Thank you. So beyond building on the guidance and standards promulgated by the WHO and other international institutions, we must also dedicate time and energy to cultivating a shared culture of collaboration on best practices for safe research. As a leader in the global health community, the United States has a key role to play here. So, Dr. Yasef, what steps can be taken to promote a culture of shared norms that prioritizes research and lab safety? And also, what role does Congress have in paving the way for stronger international biosafety cultures?
Thank you. So, I mean, I think we're all in agreement that having stronger norms and best practices for biosafety and biosecurity is critical, and we have to figure out how to do it well. We see a gap in the international system in terms of the structures in place that aren't really prioritizing this as their top mission, and that's why we're working with international partners to establish IBIS. We really believe that IBIS can help contribute to this. We think that IBIS will play a role in serving as a resource to institutions and countries around the world that are looking to get assistance with having more effective biosecurity provisions and biosafety as well in places where working alongside organizations like ABSA. So I think that that's critical. What the U.S. government can do to support that work is to diplomatically and politically support IBIS so we can build more political support in countries around the world to really have IBIS have a prominent position. I do think that IBIS, even though it's going to be a non-governmental organization, can help advance U.S. goals in biosafety and biosecurity and raise the bar globally. And so for that reason, I think it's important. The role of Congress in particular, I think, is funding. There are a lot of initiatives that have been set forth in the various strategy documents that I outlined in my testimony that I think are really promising initiatives for supporting research and innovation in biosecurity and biosafety. There are certain things that we know that we need to do, but with rapid advances in science and technology, we have to continue to innovate and stay ahead of the curve. The emerging risks are constantly moving the goalposts. So we need to invest in innovation in biosecurity and biosafety. This will help domestically, but also internationally.
Thank you. And so now that we have turned the page on the darkest days of the pandemic, we have an obligation to enact forward-looking policy solutions to reduce the likelihood of future deadly novel airborne viruses. And I look forward to building on the progress that the Biden administration and congressional Democrats have made, and do so in a strong, bipartisan way to bolster biosafety and prevent future pandemics. And I yield back.